You stand in a hall heavy with breath and silence. The torches flicker as if struggling to survive their own smoke, casting trembling shadows on walls built from conquest and fear. The scent of roasted meat hangs in the air, sweet and decaying, mingling with the musk of men and the thick perfume of power. Every surface gleams with gold and grease. Every eye avoids the king's. At the far end of the long banquet table, William sits, massive, unmoving, his bulk framed by a throne that looks too small to contain him. The hall bends toward him as if the weight of his presence alone reshapes the air. His hands, thick and scarred, rest on the table like anchors. His face, once hard with command, now seems carved from stone softened by flesh. The years of war and gluttony have thickened him, but nothing has dulled the sharpness in his eyes. You can feel the hush before it happens, the kind of silence that trembles, the kind that knows a storm is listening. Then it comes. Laughter. Thin, nervous, but it cuts through the quiet like a knife. It starts with a whisper, slides through the mouths of courtiers, and reaches the ears of the man they all fear to mock. It is not the laughter of joy, but the laughter of men too foolish to understand the danger of their own amusement. A French voice, light with arrogance, breaks through the tension. The English king grows great, he says, round and glorious as if with child. You feel the air tighten, the laughter die mid-breath. The words echo down the stone walls, slow and deliberate, like a curse spoken aloud. William's eyes lift. The candlelight catches them, cold, silver, merciless. He does not move. He does not blink. Only his jaw shifts, the muscle beneath his beard tightening until you hear the faint grind of teeth. No one dares breathe. The envoy tries to laugh again, to turn jest into apology, but the moment has already curdled. What was meant to entertain now infects the air with dread. William's voice, when it finally comes, is soft, almost tender. A pregnant woman, he repeats, tasting the words like venom. The softness is worse than rage. It is the sound of a man remembering every insult ever swallowed, every whisper ever ignored. The feast is over before anyone realizes. The hall empties quickly, servants scurrying to remove the remains of the meal, as if clearing away evidence of a crime. Outside, the night is thick and windless. You can almost hear the grinding of the king's mind as he walks through the corridors alone, his heavy steps echoing against the stone. Pride moves with him like a living thing. By morning, orders are already being given. Riders carry messages through the mist. Armor is fitted. Maps are drawn. The laughter of France will be answered with flame. The town of Mantes, unfortunate, symbolic, and doomed, is chosen as the stage where pride will seek its revenge. The courtiers will later whisper that they saw it in his eyes that night, the quiet fury, the certainty that words could be washed clean only in blood. But they will not understand the truth until much later, that a king who ruled through fear could not survive humiliation, that his body had become a kingdom collapsing from within. You see him again days later, standing before his army. The morning sun clings to his armor, sliding off in dull streaks of light. He mounts his horse with effort, breathing heavy, sweat beating along his temple. The wind carries the sound of soldiers sharpening blades, of priests mumbling blessings that even they do not believe. He looks toward the horizon where Mantes waits, unaware that its fields will soon glow red. The insult still burns in his chest. It is no longer a jest. It is a wound. The laughter of one king will drown in the fire of another. But in this moment, before the burning, before the fall, before the rot, you can already feel the weight gathering, an invisible crown pressing down on a man too proud to bow, too mortal to endure what pride has begun. Smoke drifts over the fields like breath from something ancient and waiting. You stand on the edge of Normandy's borderlands, where the grass runs dry and the horizon burns faintly red in the distance. The air tastes of ash and anger. Behind you, thousands of men gather, armored, restless, their breath misting through iron helmets. Horses stamp and snort, anxious under the weight of steel and rage. And at the heart of them, astride a great black destrier, sits William, the Duke of Normandy, the King of England, and the embodiment of vengeance wrapped in flesh and fury. This is not war born of duty or defense. It is pride sharpened into a weapon. It is the echo of laughter turned into fire. The banners above his army ripple in the cold wind, gold lions on red cloth, shining like the sun through smoke. To the west lies France, a rival kingdom divided by grudges older than memory. To the east, the land William already owns. Between them stands Mantes, a town caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, chosen not for its value but for its insult. The Norman-French rivalry has long been a feud between cousins pretending to be kings. The Capetians of France claim divine rule, while the Normans, descendants of Vikings baptized in ambition, claim destiny itself. It is not enough for either to rule, each must prove the other unworthy. In this endless contest of pride, Mantis becomes a message. A king mocked by another king must make the world remember which one of them wears the heavier crown. At dawn the army moves. You can hear it before you see it, the rattle of mail, the dull thud of hooves, the groan of wagons heavy with siege engines. The sky is bruised purple, the air thick with mist and the promise of blood. The soldiers march in silence, save for the low chant of priests invoking divine favor on men who will burn villages before nightfall. Behind them, blacksmiths hammer nails into the wheels of mangonels, archers string their bows, and carpenters fasten wooden towers that will crawl toward the city walls. By midday the army stands before Mantis. The town's spires shimmer faintly through the haze, white stone and timber shining like bones waiting for burial. Trumpets blare. The first order is given. The sky erupts with fire. Torches arc through the air and land on thatched roofs. Tarred arrows hiss through the wind, leaving trails of flame. The sound that follows is not a cry but a chorus. The scream of wood splitting, the wail of women clutching their children, the bellow of oxen running wild. The fire takes shape as if it knows where to go. Roofs fall inward, beams collapse, sparks whirl like angry stars. The river that runs beside Mantis turns black with soot and blood. You watch William ride through the chaos. His armor, gilded and heavy, reflects the burning buildings and jagged flashes of red. He does not flinch at the sight of the dying. He does not blink at the cries of the trapped. He rides like a man proving a point to the universe, his lips pressed into a thin, determined line. To him this is justice. To those beneath his hooves, it is the end of the world. The Norman soldiers move with brutal precision. They form lines and advance methodically, shields locked, faces hidden behind nasal guards. Swords are not swung wildly, they are placed, thrust, withdrawn, efficient as machines. This is conquest learned through years of campaign, perfected on English soil and now unleashed on French ground. Siege towers grind forward, their wheels spitting sparks on cobblestones. Archers climb their ladders, setting arrows alight from torches below. You can smell the mix of smoke and iron, sweat and burning hair. You can feel the heat on your face, the pulse of the flames beating like a heart too big for its chest. Hours blur into haze. The town is no longer a town, it is a furnace. The sound of collapsing buildings rolls like thunder across the plains. When the church steeple finally crumbles, it does so with the slow grace of something surrendering to the inevitable. Sparks shower the air like rain. In the midst of it, William turns his horse, surveying what he has done. To him this is not destruction. It is restoration. An insult answered, a balance restored. But the air itself seems to whisper otherwise. The fire hums his name as if in warning. He pulls his reins, guiding the horse through a narrow street filled with cinders and corpses. The animal's hooves strike against scattered shields and broken tiles. Then, without warning, the horse shies. A building nearby gives way with a groan, flames bursting from its roof. Embers scatter into the air like dying stars. The animal rears in terror. In that instant, you see it, the massive body of the king thrown forward, his armored stomach colliding with the iron pommel of the saddle. The sound is sickening, dull and deep like wood splitting under a hidden weight. William slumps forward, his face twisting in pain. His attendants rush to steady him, but he waves them off. He tries to speak and fails. There is no blood visible, no wound that can be seen, but something inside him has torn. His breathing becomes shallow. His hand presses against his belly. You can almost feel the cold realization behind his eyes, that something terrible has begun inside him, something no army can fight. He forces himself upright, his face pale beneath the grime. Around him the city burns. The fire roars as if mocking him. He grips the reins tighter and spurs the horse onward, refusing to let anyone see his weakness. Every jolt sends a fresh wave of pain through his gut. His armor, once a symbol of strength, now feels like a cage pressing against a hidden wound. But he keeps riding. The conqueror will not fall before his men. As night falls, the fires begin to die, leaving behind only embers and smoke. The air is thick and unbreathable. The streets of Mantis are lined with ash where people once stood. William dismounts, his steps uneven, his hands still clutching his abdomen. Those near him see the sweat on his brow, the tremor in his voice, the brief flicker of fear he tries to bury. The king who had built his empire on dominance now fights an enemy he cannot name. The conqueror didn't fall in battle. He fell on his own iron. The night carries his army's victory cries far across the countryside, But within that triumph rides a silence, something unseen that has already begun its work beneath his armor. The flames of Mantes will fade by morning, but what was kindled inside William will burn for the rest of his days. If you've made it this far, you already know history isn't boring, it's brutal, human, and alive. Subscribe to Tale of History now, or pretend this level of storytelling doesn't exist. The journey back to Rouen begins under the cover of smoke. The fires of Mantes still whisper behind him, smoldering like a graveyard of pride. William rides in silence, his men surrounding him in uneasy formation. The victory is already won, yet no one sings. No one shouts. The king's banner flutters weakly against the wind, the lion on its cloth moving like a beast caught in its own snare. William's face has turned pale, the color drained as if by the hand of something unseen. He grips the saddle with both hands, not from command but from pain. His breath grows short, shallow, punctuated by low groans that he tries to disguise as commands. Those nearest him can see the truth. Every step of the horse is a blade twisting deeper into his gut. The men ride in silence, pretending not to notice the way their king bends slightly forward, one hand pressed always to his side. The roads to Rouen are long, lined with withered fields and villages too poor to rebuild. Each jolt of the carriage, each shift of the litter that bears him drives the pain higher. The king's attendants wrap him in thick blankets to hide his trembling, but nothing conceals the sweat that soaks his robes. By the time they reach the gates of Rouen, the Conqueror looks less like a king than a shadow trying to remember how to stand. Inside the monastery of Saint Gervais, the air is cool, quiet, and heavy with incense. They lay him on a carved wooden bed, its sheets crisp and white. For a moment he closes his eyes and breathes, hoping the pain will settle. It does not. Instead, it deepens, blooming in his belly like something alive. The physicians gather quickly, men in dark robes carrying pouches of herbs and polished instruments. They whisper to each other in Latin, their faces solemn, their gestures rehearsed. In this age, sickness is mystery and every cure is prayer disguised as science. They begin with bleeding. 2 servants hold his arm while a physician opens a vein near the wrist. The blood flows, thick and dark, pooling into a basin. They watch it closely as though reading omens from its color. When the bleeding fails to bring relief, they turn to leeches, slick black creatures placed along his skin to draw out what they call corruption. The king flinches as they cling to him, their bodies swelling with his blood. When the last leech drops away, fat and glistening, the pain still grows. Next come the poultices, crushed herbs of sage and wormwood mixed with vinegar and honey. They smear the paste across his stomach, muttering charms learned from monks and midwives alike. The room fills with the sour-sweet smell of decay and medicine intertwined. Each attempt leaves the king weaker. The wound is not on the surface. It is hidden, festering somewhere deep within where no knife or herb can reach. Days pass. The swelling begins. What starts as a hardness beneath the ribs becomes a grotesque inflation. His belly distends until the skin stretches tight and glossy, shining with fever sweat. The color shifts from red to purple, then to the sickly gray of dying flesh. The physicians begin to avoid touching him, fearful that something inside might burst. The monks who tend to him walk with cloth pressed to their faces, the scent already thick in the air. The first stench arrives quietly. At first it smells like spoiled meat left too long in the heat. By morning it is unbearable. It clings to everything, the curtains, the straw on the floor, even the walls. Servants sprinkle crushed lavender to mask it, but the odor pushes through, stronger each hour. It is not the smell of sickness. It is the smell of rot, of something living turning to death while still breathing. William begins to understand. In the long nights, when the pain swells like the tide and sleep is a memory, he feels it spreading. He can sense the decay beneath his skin, the slow betrayal of his own body. The conqueror who bent nations to his will now lies captive to his own flesh. He calls for his physicians, demands answers they cannot give. They bow, murmur prayers, and flee the room as soon as they dare. Even they cannot bear to stand too near for long. At times his mind wanders. He sees flashes of battle, Hastings, where the air rang with steel and his heart was unbreakable. He remembers the English fields soaked in blood, the banners of Harold falling beneath his sword. He recalls the roar of victory, the weight of the crown placed upon his head at Westminster. In those moments he almost believes the pain will fade, that he will rise again and ride as he once did. But then the infection reminds him of its dominion. A new wave of heat surges through him, his body trembling with fever. His attendants whisper outside the door, arguing over who must enter next. Some weep. Others refuse outright. Inside, William stares at the ceiling, the candlelight rippling across his face. He feels his skin tightening, stretching with every breath. The swelling has begun to press on his lungs. Each inhalation becomes a labor, each exhale a surrender. When he speaks, his voice sounds hollow, distant, as though spoken through another man's mouth. The monks pray through the night. Their chants echo down the corridors, low, rhythmic, endless. They beg for divine mercy, for the easing of a soul trapped in a body turning to corruption. Yet even their faith falters when the smell thickens. Some faint, others vomit quietly into corners before returning to their prayers. The king's chamber becomes a place of dread, a living tomb that no one wishes to enter. By the third week, the king no longer hides his suffering. His screams reach through the monastery, startling birds from their perches. He clutches his belly and pleads for relief, for death, for anything to end the torment. His once powerful voice breaks into sobs that echo like confessions. To see him now is to see the truth of mortality, the fall of might into decay, the crown sinking into flesh. Outside, the kingdom stirs uneasily. Rumors spread through Normandy and across the Channel. The king is dying. Some say poisoned. Others whisper that God himself has turned against the Conqueror for his sins. In taverns, peasants lift mugs and speak of justice. In castles, nobles sharpen ambitions behind closed doors. Even as William fights for breath, his empire begins to tremble under the weight of uncertainty. Within the monastery, the air grows still. The king sleeps fitfully, haunted by the ghosts of his victories. In his dreams, he rides again across the field of Hastings. But the wind there smells the same as it does now, sweet, heavy, corrupt. He looks down and sees not earth beneath his horse but flesh. His own flesh. He wakes screaming, the echo carrying through stone corridors until the monks cross themselves and whisper prayers for his soul. If you're still here, still listening, you already understand what most never do. History isn't cold dates and kings, it's the smell of their bodies rotting in the dark. Subscribe to Tale of History now, or turn away like those who fled his chamber. Some truths are too human to ignore. The nights inside the monastery grow longer, darker, and quieter. The air is thick now, weighted by the stench of decay that no prayer or incense can drive away. The torches burn low, their flames coughing against the damp, and the windows remain sealed to keep the smell from drifting into the cloisters. Yet it seeps through anyway, into the corridors, into the chapel, into the dreams of the monks who wake gasping, convinced that death itself has learned to breathe. William's chamber has become a place of ritual, a daily battle against corruption that no one can win. Each morning the servants strip his bed, gathering the sheets stiff with sweat and fluid. They carry them out with shaking hands, their faces covered in linen soaked with vinegar. The linens are burned in the courtyard, the smoke rising like an offering no god wants to accept. Fresh sheets are laid, but by evening they are soaked again, the odor thicker, the infection deeper. The king no longer resembles the man who crossed the sea and crowned himself conqueror. His body is swollen and discolored, the skin stretched so tight across his belly that it gleams like oil. Purple veins crawl beneath the surface, branching like the roots of some malignant tree. The physicians have stopped pretending to heal him. They come less often, muttering of fever and imbalance, but mostly they stay away. The monks tend to him now, though their faces betray the same fear. Each time they enter, one carries the holy water and another the cross, as if uncertain whether they are walking into a sick room or a tomb. The infection spreads beyond his flesh. It enters the air, the silence, the hearts of those who once swore loyalty. Attendants begin to vanish. Some ask to be reassigned, others simply never return. Those who remain no longer serve from duty but from desperation, hoping that proximity to power, even dying power, might grant them favor or gold. Yet even that faith begins to rot. One night, a servant slips the ring from William's finger while he sleeps. The gold leaves a pale circle against the bloated flesh. The next day, a jeweled chalice disappears from the bedside table. Soon it becomes routine. Treasures vanish one by one, a brooch, a dagger, a silver crucifix. The monks write of it later in their chronicles, their words laced with horror, that the king who once commanded nations lay helpless while his own servants picked him clean. It is a slow looting of dignity, the final proof that even the mighty are abandoned when the stench of death grows too thick. Sometimes he wakes and sees them. His vision blurs from fever, but he knows the shapes moving through the room are not angels. He hears the quiet rustle of robes, the creak of drawers, the soft clink of metal. He calls out, his voice cracked and breathless. "Leave them," he whispers. "They're mine." But the figures do not stop. They take and they go. The betrayal does not surprise him, it wounds him differently. In his delirium, he mutters not curses but confessions. The monks who record his final days write that he spoke to shadows, arguing with them about God, about punishment, about whether conquest itself was sin. Sometimes he weeps, pressing his hands together in prayer, begging for forgiveness. Other times he curses heaven for cowardice, demanding to know why a lifetime of triumph should end in this humiliation. Between prayers and pain, his mind drifts. He sees faces, Harold at Hastings, the English rebels crushed beneath his sword, the burning villages in the north. He hears the screams of those he condemned, the crackle of fire devouring homes. The past visits him not as memory but as judgment. In the flicker of torchlight he seems to speak to those ghosts directly. I did what was necessary, he whispers. I built a kingdom. I gave them order. But the silence that follows feels like refusal. At times he believes he sees his father, Robert the Magnificent, standing in the shadows. Other times his mother, Herleva the tanner's daughter, her eyes full of pity he cannot bear. He mutters to them, calling himself bastard, conqueror, sinner and child, as though the words themselves might balance the scales. The monks watching him cross themselves in terror, unsure whether he confesses or descends into madness. Each breath becomes harder. The swelling presses on his lungs. His chest rises like a bellows straining against its own weight. The room reeks of vinegar, sweat and rot. Candles burn constantly, not for light but to thin the air. Even then, those who enter gag behind their sleeves. One monk writes later that it felt like standing beside an open grave while the corpse still spoke. William knows it too. He can feel the nearness of the end, can feel his body hollowing. In the rare moments of lucidity he asks for confession. The monks gather by his bedside, their eyes averted. He grips the crucifix with trembling hands, his voice a rasp. I have sinned, he says. I have taken lives, burned homes, defied God's mercy. I have ruled with fear. Tears streak his cheeks, tracing pale lines through the grime. And now, he whispers, he has repaid me in kind. His words hang in the air, heavy as the smell that fills the room. The monks bless him, but their prayers sound fragile, their faith uncertain. Outside, the bells of Rouen toll faintly through the mist. Inside, the king weeps, clutching at the cross as if it were the last weapon left to him. The conqueror who once commanded armies now commands only silence. The throne he built from war and willpower has rotted with him. He is surrounded by walls of stone, by servants who steal, by monks who fear him, by a God he cannot reach. And beneath it all lies the truth that no crown can protect against. The body obeys no kingdom but death. If this part hurts to hear, imagine living it. Don't let stories like this vanish into silence. Subscribe to Tale of History, because history deserves a voice, not an algorithm's grave. The night outside the monastery has fallen completely silent. The wind that once rattled the shutters now moves like a whisper through the eaves, cautious not to disturb what waits within. Inside, the room is lit by a handful of trembling candles, their flames bending beneath the weight of the stench that clings to every surface. The conqueror lies propped upon pillows, his breath thin and uneven. His body has begun to collapse inward, the swelling giving way to exhaustion. The fever no longer burns, it merely glows faintly like embers before their final fade. He calls for the priest. His voice is soft, yet everyone hears it because no one dares ignore a dying king. The monks come, robes brushing against stone, eyes fixed on the floor. They bring relics and incense, a bowl of holy water, the cross. The smell of sanctity cannot mask the rot, but they light the candles anyway. The wax runs fast, melting like time itself. William asks for privacy. The attendants withdraw, though a few linger at the door, straining to hear. They will later swear they caught pieces of his confession, fragments of a soul unraveling. The king folds his hands over his chest. His voice trembles. I have made the world bleed, he says. I have conquered by the sword, and by the sword I will be judged. The priests urge him to speak freely, to purge the burden before death seals it in silence. And so he does. He begins with England. He speaks of that cold October morning at Hastings, the sky low and colorless, the banners stiff with dew. He remembers the sound of iron striking iron, the mud slick with blood, the scream of horses, the broken shields. He remembers Harold's standard falling, and the strange calm that followed, as if the world itself had been broken open and remade in his image. He speaks of the crown that felt like victory and poison at once. Then the words come faster. He recalls the rebellions, the sieges, the harrying of the north. His voice cracks as he speaks of it, the campaign that turned an entire region into a grave. He describes the snow blackened by ash, the fields stripped bare, the rivers choked with corpses. He remembers the faces of peasants frozen where they fell, mothers curled around their children, entire villages vanishing beneath the frost. I killed them all, he whispers. I burned their food. I left them to starve. I destroyed what I could not rule. One of the monks weeps quietly, but William continues. They called it justice, he says. But I knew. It was fear. It was rage. It was pride. For a moment the room is still. Only the drip of melted wax fills the silence. He speaks next of his sons, Robert, the rebel, William Rufus, the cold one, Henry, clever but small in his father's eyes. I ruled kingdoms, he murmurs, but I could not rule my own blood. His tone hardens, then softens again into regret. I made them rivals. I built walls between them and called it strength. I see it now, they will destroy each other over the bones of what I leave behind. He stares toward the far wall, eyes clouded with fever. Normandy to Robert, he mutters. England to Rufus. Gold to Henry. He pauses, swallowing against the dryness in his throat. I have given them swords and hatred instead of peace. When I am gone, my house will devour itself. And that too will be my doing. The priests exchange glances but say nothing. They sprinkle the holy water upon his hands. He flinches at the cold touch, then sighs. I wanted to be remembered, he says. I wanted my name to live forever. And it will. But not as I wished. They will not speak of my justice or my courage. They will speak of this, the stench, the rot, the punishment. I have become my own judgment. His eyes move toward the crucifix above his bed. Christ died for the sins of man, he whispers. But I die for mine alone. The candles burn lower. The wax pools beside the bed, glimmering faintly in the gloom. A bell begins to toll somewhere beyond the walls, the slow peal of the cathedral marking the hour before dawn. Each strike seems to pull a little more life from him. Between the bells, the monks murmur prayers, their voices blending with his labored breathing. He tries to raise his hand to his chest but can no longer lift it. His body has turned heavy as though gravity itself wishes to keep him still. His lips move around a final confession, too soft for anyone to hear. Perhaps it is the name of a saint, or perhaps of someone long dead. Then slowly his chest rises one last time. The air leaves him in a quiet sigh that almost sounds like relief. The room remains still. For a heartbeat, it feels as if nothing has changed. Then the nearest candle flickers, and the flame bends toward him as if bowing. The king's eyes are open but they see nothing. The conqueror who once reshaped the world now lies motionless, a man reduced to silence. Outside, the bells of Rouen continue to ring, their echoes carried over the rooftops into the mist. Each note drifts farther, until even the city seems to hold its breath. Death comes not like an enemy but like mercy. The pain ceases. The rot, though it remains, no longer matters. What once was a throne is now a bed of dust, and what once was a king is now only flesh returning to the earth. You're still listening, stay. The story isn't finished and neither is the reckoning. Subscribe to Tale of History, and bear witness to the truths the past tried to bury. The moment William's breath stills, the silence that follows is not reverent, it is frightened. The monks do not cross themselves right away. They stare, waiting for the corpse to move, half expecting it to shudder as it has done for days. When it does not, they exhale softly, some in prayer, others in disbelief. The conqueror of England, the terror of two kingdoms, lies dead in his bed. His mouth open, his eyes glassy, his body already shifting from life into something unrecognizable. For a few moments no one approaches. The flickering candles throw uneven light across the room, catching on the sheen of his skin. His body, still enormous even in death, seems to swell with every breath of silence that follows. The monks step back. The odor, once merely unbearable, now becomes suffocating. It is a smell that crawls into the lungs, a heavy sweetness rotting from the inside out. The attendants who have remained this long turn away, pressing their sleeves to their faces. Then one by one they begin to leave. There is no ceremony, no cry of mourning, no reverence for the man who once commanded nations. They flee not from grief but from the stench. Within the hour the king's chamber is empty. The candles burn low, forgotten. Outside the door, a servant vomits into the straw and does not return. By dawn, word spreads through the monastery that the king's body is untouched. The monks debate what must be done. Tradition demands embalming, washing, and holy preparation. But when the abbot himself enters the chamber, he recoils. the sight of the corpse halts him. The skin, tight and purple, gleams with a waxen shine. The belly has ballooned further, stretched as if filled with air. Dark stains seep through the sheets beneath him. Flies, summoned by death, already gather at the corners of his mouth and eyes. The abbot orders the windows thrown open. The cold morning air rushes in, but it does not help. The smell is older, thicker than air can carry away. No one volunteers to embalm him. The monks whisper of divine punishment, that the hand of God himself forbids the body's cleansing. When the abbot offers payment, they refuse again. The king, it seems, is beyond even the mercy of ritual. Finally, a small group of servants is found, men desperate enough to take the task for coin. They cover their faces with cloth and work in silence. They attempt to wash him, but his flesh tears easily, the skin slipping beneath their fingers like wet parchment. They abandon the effort and instead pour wine across his body, hoping its scent will mask the corruption. It does not. The wine mingles with the fluids already seeping from him, creating a foul sweetness that fills the room. A decision is made to seal him in a coffin quickly. A local craftsman brings a lead-lined box, roughly hammered together in haste. They line it with linen soaked in herbs, rosemary, thyme, myrrh, and frankincense. The monks recite blessings over the mixture, though their voices waver. As the servants lift the body, a sound escapes from deep within, a low, wet groan as gases shift and escape. Someone crosses himself. Someone else runs out of the room. They lower the body into the coffin. The abdomen distends further under its own pressure. The lid will not close at first, it must be forced down. When it finally seals, the lid is soldered shut, and still the smell leaks through the seams. It is carried from the chamber into the courtyard where the horses wait. A few villagers have gathered to watch, drawn by rumor. When the coffin passes, the crowd falls back, covering their mouths. Dogs whine and slink away. Children cry without knowing why. The procession begins. It is meant to be solemn, but there is no grandeur, only necessity. The wagon creaks beneath the coffin's weight as it rolls through the streets of Rouen. People line the path, staring in silence. Some bow faintly. Others spit. The man who once ruled with fire now moves through his own kingdom like an outcast. The bells toll above him, but even the sound seems muffled, hesitant. The road to Caen stretches long and uneven. The wheels sink into mud. The horses strain. The attendants who walk beside the wagon keep scarves over their faces, yet still they gag. At intervals, the smell thickens, forcing the procession to halt while men retch into the grass. Flies swarm around the seams of the coffin, the air shimmering with heat and decay. By midday the sun beats down on the metal. The lead grows warm to the touch. Inside, decomposition accelerates. The coffin begins to leak. Brown fluid seeps from the edges, dripping down the wagon's sides and onto the road. One of the guards curses softly, wiping at it with a cloth that only spreads the stain. They wrap the base of the coffin in tarred cloth, but the ooze continues to gather. No one speaks of it aloud, but everyone knows, the king's body is breaking apart. In the villages they pass, peasants gather to watch. Some cross themselves, others back away. A few whisper that the smell itself is a sign of divine justice, that the conqueror who had filled England with graves now travels toward his own. When the wagon creaks through a marketplace, a butcher closes his stall, muttering that the meat will spoil if left in that air. At night, the procession camps by the roadside. Fires are lit, but no one dares eat near the coffin. The attendants sleep far from it, covering their faces even in dreams. The horses snort and stamp, refusing to rest. Once, in the middle of the night, a wolf howls from the woods and another answers closer. The men swear they see shadows circling at the edge of the firelight, drawn by the scent of rot and blood. By the time they reach Caen, the air itself seems changed. The coffin leaks a trail behind it, darkening the road. Flies rise in a thick cloud from its surface. The townspeople who come to greet their dead king take one breath and recoil. They cover their faces with their sleeves and scatter. The abbey bells begin to ring, calling the city to mourning, but no one draws near enough to mourn. The conqueror's final journey is over. He has crossed no sea, claimed no land, and yet every mile has been a conquest of decay, each step a victory for the earth reclaiming its own. The same man who marched across nations now travels in pieces, his legend rotting inside its own coffin. If you're still watching, you're not like the ones who turned away. Subscribe to Tale of History, and stay. The rest won't. The bells of Saint Etienne toll across Caen, slow and heavy, each strike rolling through the cold morning air like the echo of judgment itself. Inside the abbey, the stone walls hold the sound and deepen it. The floor trembles beneath the rhythm of death. The mourners have gathered, nobles and clergy, armored knights and trembling servants, all drawn by duty more than devotion. The Conqueror is to be buried today, William, the king who once bent kingdoms to his will, now lying silent in a coffin that leaks. Candles line the nave, their flames bending toward the procession that enters from the great doors. The smell arrives first, thick, sweet and unmistakably wrong. It rides on the air like invisible smoke. The monks who carry the incense swing their censers harder, the silver chains clinking in rhythm, desperate to drown the odor with sanctity. But even frankincense falters before the truth of what they are masking. The body is rotting faster than faith can hide. The coffin, wrapped in a pall of black cloth, moves slowly through the crowd. Its weight bows the shoulders of the men beneath it. Each step echoes hollowly against the stone floor. The nobles bow their heads, but their eyes flick upward, darting to the stains that seep through the cloth. The priests chant, their voices low and steady, though the melody wavers, shaken by the breath they must fight to draw. At the altar, the abbey glows gold from the light of 100 candles. It is a place built for triumph, for coronations and glory, yet today it feels like a tomb before its time. The coffin is lowered before the marble sarcophagus carved years earlier for this very moment, a monument meant to enshrine victory. Now it stands like an accusation, cold and unwelcoming, as if the stone itself resents what it must receive. The ceremony begins. Hymns rise and fall like the breathing of a dying man. The words of scripture echo from the vaulted ceiling, each syllable rolling into the shadows. The priests sprinkle holy water, but the droplets hiss when they strike the lead surface, running dark and greasy down the sides. No one speaks of it, but all see it. The king's body is still leaking. When the order comes to open the coffin, a heavy silence grips the room. Tradition demands it, the final viewing before entombment, the last sign of honor. The attendants move forward with reluctance, tools and trembling hands. The soldered seal breaks with a sound like tearing flesh. A hiss escapes, compressed air thick with decay, and the smell hits them in a wave. It is unbearable. A sound rises from the front ranks of mourners, gagging, gasping, the muffled cries of men trying not to disgrace themselves. The monks stumble backward, clutching their censers, swinging them wildly. The air fills with incense so dense it clouds the candles, but it cannot overcome what seeps from that coffin. The odor of rot and wine, blood and corruption, fills the holy space. Still they must continue. The priests chant louder, their Latin breaking with each breath. The attendants grip the edge of the coffin, trying to lift the corpse. What they touch is soft and slick, the linen soaked through, the flesh beneath liquefied by heat and gas. The armor beneath the wrappings creaks as they pull. The sarcophagus has been cut too small, its measurements taken from the man he once was, not the swollen ruin he has become. They push harder. There is a moment's pause, a strained silence, and then it happens. The body bursts. A wet, violent sound splits the air, followed by a torrent of fluid that spills onto the floor. The smell transforms from horror into catastrophe. The candles flicker, some snuffing out completely. Men drop to their knees, retching, stumbling over one another in blind panic. The hymns collapse into chaos. The scene that follows defies ceremony. Nobles rush for the doors, tripping on their robes, pressing cloths to their mouths. Priests drop their books and flee, gagging as they go. The choir scatters. Only a few monks remain, frozen between terror and obligation. They move quickly now, shoving what remains of the body into the sarcophagus. Their hands shake. They say no words of farewell, only the half-formed prayers of men trying to finish a duty before they faint. Orderic Vitalis, the chronicler who would one day record the event, wrote that it was as though the wrath of God had entered the church itself. He wrote that the stench was so thick it seemed to stain the air, that the candles burned dim, that the marble floor was slick with the fluids of the dead king. He wrote that no one spoke of honor again after that day, only of the punishment that follows pride. When the masons finally seal the sarcophagus, the church stands in ruins of its own sanctity. The scent will linger for weeks, trapped in the stone, a reminder of the day power rotted in public. The bells toll again, this time without rhythm, as if unsure whether to mourn or warn. Outside, the people of Can whisper that God himself rejected the king, that even the earth refused him, that his body burst because it could not bear the weight of its sins. Inside, the monks kneel before the sealed tomb, too afraid to speak the truth aloud. The conqueror of kingdoms was conquered by his own decay. Even the conqueror's corpse refused to bow. If you've stayed through this far, it means you're not like the rest, the ones who look away when history turns ugly. Subscribe to Tale of History, and stay with the stories others can't bear to face. In the days that followed, the tale of the king's burial spread faster than any herald could carry it. From Caen to Rouen, from Normandy to England, the story took on the weight of divine judgment. The conqueror who once seemed untouchable had rotted before the eyes of his court. To the people it was not disease. It was justice. Peasants whispered it in the fields as they bent over the soil he had once claimed as his own, that God had refused him rest. Merchants repeated it in taverns, lowering their voices only enough to keep from sounding blasphemous. Even the clergy, though cautious, began to echo the rumor in sermons. Behold the lesson of the mighty king who ruled without mercy and found none in death. The chronicles of the time do not shy from cruelty. They linger on it. They describe how his flesh burst before the altar, how nobles fled like frightened animals. They record the smell that seemed to hang over Caen for weeks, a stench said to carry the memory of sin itself. For the common people, it became a parable, a story told to their children beside the fire. No crown, they would say, can cover what festers beneath. The theologians of the 12th century took the tale further. To them, the body of William became a symbol of the mortal corruption of pride. Monks copied the account onto parchment with careful, reverent horror. They wrote that just as his body swelled and burst, so too did his arrogance, unable to contain itself under the pressure of divine wrath. The bursting of the king's corpse became more than a physical event. It was a sermon written in flesh. In monasteries across Europe, his story entered the litany of warnings told to young novices, that no matter how vast one's empire, no man escapes the humility of the grave. The Latin phrases etched in the margins of these manuscripts still echo that sentiment. Superbia putrescit, pride decays. But there is another layer, one that modern eyes can still see beneath the centuries of superstition. The science of death speaks in the same language, stripped of faith but not of awe. The swelling of William's body, the gases that filled his abdomen, the final rupture. These are the known mechanics of mortality. The conqueror died of peritonitis, his abdomen crushed and infected from within. Bacteria began their silent work, breaking down tissue, feeding on the remains of power and flesh alike. The pressure that built inside him was not metaphor, it was physics, chemistry, inevitability. The same air he once used to give commands turned against him, trapped in the chambers of his body, expanding as decay consumed him. The burst that shattered the ceremony at Saint Etienne was not a miracle of vengeance but the final act of biology reclaiming its due. The medieval chroniclers, though ignorant of the science, understood something deeper. They saw the poetry of it, the symmetry between pride and decay, between empire and entropy. To them, his body became a canvas upon which both God and nature painted their truths, that the power to build kingdoms is nothing beside the power that takes them away. For generations after, preachers stood before their congregations and told of William's death. They described the swelling, the odor, the bursting, not as horror but as holy warning. His name was invoked not to honor victory, but to humble those who dared dream of it. His legend, once gilded in conquest, became a moral wound reopened by every sermon. The conqueror, they said, was conquered by the flesh. And yet the paradox endured. His castle still stood. His dynasty still ruled. The blood of the rotting king flowed through generations of monarchs who would one day sit on the same English throne he seized by force. The world remembered both halves of him, the man who made a nation and the man whose corpse defiled a church. History itself seemed to hesitate between admiration and disgust. In time, even scholars began to see his story as something larger, a reflection on the very nature of power. Every empire, no matter how vast, decays from within. Every ruler, no matter how feared, is only mortal matter waiting for its turn to break. The chronicles of William's death became a mirror through which later kings glimpsed their own fragility. They built monuments higher, buried themselves deeper, armored their tombs in marble, but still the earth waited. And today when we speak of him, it is not the victory at Hastings that lingers. It is not the Norman banners, nor the English crown. It is the bursting coffin. The final indignity that stripped away legend and left only truth. The smell of mortality heavy in the air of a sacred place. Science can explain the gas, the infection, the rupture. But it cannot erase the meaning that men saw in it. That image, of power undone by its own body, transcends the centuries because it speaks to something beyond biology. It is the reminder that every conquest, every empire, every triumph returns to the same dust. That beneath armor and crown, all kings are the same when they rot. If you've come this far, you've seen beyond the myth into the marrow of history itself. Most will turn away from this kind of truth. You didn't? Subscribe to Tale of History, and remember, even the greatest are measured not by how they lived, but by what remains when the flesh gives way. Centuries passed, and the stone walls of Saint Etienne outlived the men who had sealed them. The marble that once gleamed white with reverence turned the color of dust, the air within the abbey growing colder, quieter, more detached from the moment it had once witnessed. The Conqueror's name faded from daily speech, surviving only in chronicles and whispers, until time itself began to gnaw at his memory just as the earth had gnawed at his flesh. But history does not sleep forever. It stirs, sometimes through devotion, sometimes through desecration. The tomb of William the Conqueror would not rest in peace. The first violation came during the Wars of Religion. The 16th century tore France apart, pitting brother against brother, faith against faith. The Abbey of Saint Etienne became a casualty in that invisible struggle for heaven. Soldiers broke through the gates, torches in hand, their armor clattering through the ancient nave. They looted the altars, shattered the marble effigies, and turned their fury upon the Conqueror's tomb. The stone lid that had held his remains for nearly 500 years was pried open and thrown aside. Inside they found what the centuries had spared: a few bones, fragments of linen hardened by time, traces of lead and dust. The Conqueror who once claimed 2 kingdoms now lay reduced to brittle remnants of himself. The soldiers, in their zeal or ignorance, scattered the bones across the floor. Some took pieces as trophies. Others kicked them into the rubble. When they left, the tomb gaped open, emptied, desecrated, forgotten. Later, when peace returned, monks came to restore what they could. They gathered what little they found: a single thigh bone, yellowed and fragile, buried in the debris. The rest was lost to time and violence. That one bone, all that remained of the man who reshaped nations, was placed reverently into a smaller coffin. The new inscription carved upon the stone above it read simply, Hic jacet Guilelmus Conquistor. Here lies William the Conqueror. But even the Latin feels uncertain now, as though the stone itself questions the claim. The centuries continued their quiet work. Wars came and went, revolutions swept across France, and still the abbey stood, scarred but unbroken. In the 19th century, when archaeologists began to study the tomb, they opened it again. Inside they found only the thigh bone, carefully wrapped in cloth, lying in a hollow far smaller than the man who once filled it. The bone was examined, measured, catalogued. Scholars debated whether it truly belonged to William, but none could deny the poetry of the truth it represented: how empires collapse until even the bones that built them are lost to strangers' hands. Modern science has touched what remains. Carbon analysis, isotopic tests, anatomical comparisons, they all confirm what history already knew in spirit. The Conqueror's body has vanished, scattered by time, violence, and neglect. Only one fragment persists, mute and incomplete, resting beneath stone in can. A single bone to bear the weight of a man who once bore 2 crowns. Visitors who come to Saint Etienne today often walk past the tomb without pausing. The marble slab is plain, unadorned, nearly anonymous. Few realize that beneath it lies not a body but a symbol, a relic of decay and survival both. The echoes of the abbey are still there if you listen: the chants, the panic, the bursting coffin, the silence that followed. Every sound still lingers, bound in the stone that watched it all. And perhaps that is fitting. For the Conqueror's final lesson was never about victory. It was about the slow, relentless leveling that follows it. Castles crumble, thrones rot, crowns tarnish, and even bones turn to dust. The empire of flesh yields to the empire of time, and time bows to no one. The man who once commanded armies now commands nothing. He owned kingdoms. He built laws. He reshaped the map of Europe. And yet, in the end, all that remains of him, of his power, his hunger, his divine right, is a single thigh bone lying beneath a quiet church floor. The Conqueror of men, reduced to a fragment of himself. The man who owned 2 kingdoms now owns 1 bone. And that, perhaps, is the truest history of all, the one written not in ink or victory, but in the silence of what time leaves behind. You've walked through 3 hours of rot, pride, and mortality. Don't leave without marking your presence. Subscribe to Tale of History, or step into the comments and tell us why you'd rather forget how power always ends, like this.